Hello and welcome to Peace at Home Parenting. I'm Ruth Freeman, licensed clinical social worker and founder of Peace at Home. And today we're talking about parents and back to school, and specifically your worries about back to school. And this is very important for your kids too. It isn't just about you, but it's about your kids. And this is a conversation. It's not a class. We're going to just be having a discussion. And I'm going to ask Aaron to introduce himself. And please send your questions and comments into the chat all the way throughout the class. You can start right now. Go ahead, Aaron.
My name is Aaron Weintraub. I'm a teacher with Peace at Home. I also work with incarcerated parents and children with special needs. And I have three children of my own, a 21-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old. So chances are, wherever you are in your parenting journey, I am in the trenches with you, or I've been there recently. And I'm glad to be teaching here today with Ruth, and glad to see that we've already got some chats coming in.
I just want to say that my 3 and 7-year-old grandchildren are visiting, and they may be bursting in at any moment, but it'll just, bring some comic relief to our conversation. I have a 5-year-old going to kindergarten. Can't wait to learn a little today. That has to be one of the, I wish Cora were here. That has to be one of the most challenging transitions. And we actually have a whole class about it. And I want to remind everybody, whenever we mention classes, you can always email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com. Cora Megan is an early childhood expert, and she teaches a lovely class on kindergarten and that big transition to kindergarten. Aaron, do you want to say a few things about transition to kindergarten and parent worries?
Well, something that I was when I was thinking about this class today, something that you said that really stuck with me. One time you said that your child is unlikely to be less anxious than you are. And I love that, because it encapsulates, that we don't have the power to necessarily to make them feel a certain way, but we do have a immense power to sort of set a ceiling on their ability to experience something new with excitement and enthusiasm, and not carry our baggage into that experience with them.
And I think the kindergarten transition is perfect around this. One of the first things I encourage parents to do is try to reflect on your experience of going to whatever the transition is that's causing you some distress. Because Aaron mentioned earlier when we were chatting that every school year before school starts, he gets a stomach ache. And I asked him, so what was it like when you were going to school yourself? And the chances are he probably had that stomach ache as a kid. And so often our children's experiences trigger our own histories. And I was very scared to go to kindergarten, and I was nervous about it for my daughter, but I did a lot of reading beforehand. And I'll share with you that practically speaking, visiting the school beforehand is great. And drawing pictures with your child, letting them draw what they think the first day of kindergarten is going to be like. You draw pictures of what you think the first day of kindergarten is going to be like. Drawing pictures is a way of helping kids express their concerns. And one of my favorite things about getting ready for kindergarten, if your child is in an all-day program, is that Cora suggests that you help your child deal with their lunchbox. So you put the whole lunchbox together, and they take it apart and open the sandwich and open the water bottle, and you have a little practice lunchbox. And I think any kinds of practices, you want to insert fun and laughter and enjoyment, rather than trying to get your kid to, put the paper back into the lunchbox perfectly. And I think the main idea we're thinking about is signaling. What are we signaling to our kids? So if we pass by the school and we say, whoa, there's your school, look at those swings, there's lots of swings, that looks like fun, rather than, okay, you're going to be starting school on Monday, and you need to follow the directions and what the teacher says, and you need to behave. Whatever we talk about, our tone, our facial expression, what we're signaling to our child is probably the most important thing. So we have a little comment here. I made that connection a few weeks ago while talking to my therapist. I had a hard time with school, attempting not to put that concern and anxiety on him. And that is the antidote. The antidote is to talk to other adults about it and process it and see that it's different today. It's not the same. Any other thoughts about helping parents deal with their own worries, Aaron?
Well, I think it's important, like you said, to recognize that they're different. We're processing our childhood experiences through our adult lens, but sometimes there's that overlap. And when that happens, it's sweet because then we can help ourselves and our children at the same time. And one of the pieces of advice that I often give parents when their kids are struggling in school, at whatever age, is to find, at least one adult that they can really connect with, bond with, build a trusting relationship, and that's sort of their safety person. And my experience with my kids going to kindergarten not that long ago was that was something that was really helpful for me as well. And for me, it was the kid's bus driver. I didn't know very many people at the school, but my older daughter had the same bus driver as my son, and then the next son, and for that first day when I put him on the bus, it's hard for me to imagine even doing it. But she was just so comforting, and she'd seen it before, and was made me feel safe in a way that allowed me to then help my child to feel safe. And if that's that's going to be different depending on different people's situations, but often the people who choose to work in the front office or take care of the grounds or the building, or a teacher or administrator or a therapist, if you as a parent can find a safe adult in that classroom community to connect to, I think that really helps you to feel safe as well.
And you can ask specific questions about that. What if he can't get his boots on? What happens? The little things that you worry about, you can ask questions. And we have one parent talking about transitioning to 8th grade, 6th grade, and 4th grade. And she's talking about routines. And I think if there is a magic bullet around school, this is the magic bullet. But let's talk about how we develop routines. I would love to hear from that parent. Any process you use to develop routines, or any routines that you particularly like. You can just put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. What I like to recommend to parents is that we create the routines as a team. And that could be the whole family talking about what's the morning routine look like, what does it look like after school, what happens after dinner, so forth. Or it could be you and one child and doing it with each child a little bit first. Okay, so let's see what parent has to say. I talked to them about what they want to do in the mornings and what they want to do after school before their sports. So this is a parent checking in with the kids about creating those routines. Then we set up Alexa reminders. Oh, I love that. What's a time tree? Wait, and a time tree. Do you know what a time tree is, Aaron?
No, we'll learn something from our
I know.
community here today.
I
But yeah.
use Alexa to announce reminders like time to put on their shoes.
Oh.
A
So Time
calendar
Tree is
app.
a calendar app. Okay, we'll have to check that out.
Wonderful. I
Um,
love Alexa doing it instead of you. That's brilliant.
well, I think for certain things, right? So I do that too. I actually did that over COVID when my kids were home. I set them up to give verbal reminders when it was time to get ready for school, time to start school because we were home, and time to take a break. So sort of those things that can create conflict, I outsourced. But other things like, there was the option to kind of make the Google thing say, great job, and sort of offer encouragement, and those things, and even like offering breaks, I think are important, to keep personal. And so I love the idea of outsourcing sort of the bad guy parent stuff, like, oh, it's time to start, it's time to stop. But make sure that you keep the reminders that build connection.
And building connection is your best strategy to protect your child's mental health. I think one of the big worries of parents about the new school year is the pediatric mental health crisis, and there's reason to worry. However, your relationship with your child day to day, moment to moment, is one of the biggest protective factors. And I'm going to say a couple of things about that. When we talk about your relationship, we mean your relationship expressed in certain ways. So it's your relationship with your child in terms of, when we talk about attachment, we say seen, safe, soothed, and secure. Seen, safe, soothed, and secure. Seen means that the child feels like you get them, you notice them, you are in touch with who they are, and you notice when they're having emotions, and you show up, and and you know their unique traits and accept them. Safe, obviously, is that you're not going to hurt them on purpose, and if you are hurtful towards them, you take responsibility and make amends. Soothed is that the relationship is essentially calming. And this is probably one of the hardest tasks right now because you're not always feeling calm. But children need the relationship in order to use it as a protective factor with mental health. They need the relationship to be essentially calming. And if you're stressing about them getting their homework done perfectly, or being dressed perfectly, or their hair being done perfectly, that's not going to be a soothing morning to go off to school. Seen, safe, soothed, and secure. Secure means they know that you have their back when they go out into the world. And some very practical strategies for you to strive for it. We can't do this perfectly. I don't know anyone who does this perfectly. But I'm going to give you some examples of ways that we build the relationship in a protective way. And that is avoiding criticism to the best of your ability, asking for what you do want, but avoiding criticism. Avoiding giving unsolicited advice. My daughter's visiting me. I'm hoping she's not hearing this because I'm terrible at this. But to the best of your ability, avoid giving unsolicited advice. That means avoid giving advice when no one's asked you for it. And avoid conflict and arguing. Those are 3 of probably 10 practices we think about. But if you're wanting to build that positive relationship with your child, you want to focus on being positive with them and taking delight in them to the best of your ability. Erin, do you have anything to add to that? You're muted, Erin.
I think you've really kind of encapsulated what you know, I've somebody I read, I'm having a hard time placing it right now. Mona Delahook, you know, wrote that it's a shift from what you do to your child or with your child to how you are with them, and that being that shift, right? Like, so you can have the calmest routine, but if you're stressed and tense, there's this ambient anxiety that your child is going to feel. You can have a chaotic household where all of your plans are falling apart and there's dog hair and dishes and all of that. But if you're doing this with a consistently provided, you know, love and acceptance and connection, it's going to be fine, you know. So how we do things is sort of the underlying factor in what we decide to do. And it's a shift from, you know, and I think that's one of the things about Peace at Home that I really love. There's a, you know, a importance placed on skills, but skills are not really what, you know, there's skills-based parent education, and then there's a type that talks about how to build that connection from which then your instincts are going to be right when they come up. You're not going to have a map of what to do every time.
And if you can understand that the relationship is where it all happens, not the perfect parenting strategies, but the quality of the relationship, you can relax into that. And for those of us that didn't grow up with those relationships, which is a good number of people in the United States for sure, if you didn't grow up with those relationships, it is important to learn about it, talk about it, watch good models, you know, think about the, you know, the people in your neighborhood. I remember there was a mom that used to bring her kid to school, and she'd be he was probably, I don't know, 5 or something, and she'd be on the ground with him, rolling around, playing with him before school, and it was always like, "Oh, I wanna be that mom so much." And she didn't care how she looked, and she just was, and she was I knew her, she was a very physical person, but just having that joy with her kid on the way to school was so, and I didn't understand at the time. We didn't even understand about signaling joy and playfulness and how it calms the brain and it opens the brain up to learning, and playfulness is amazing. And I didn't grow up with it. Um, I I like to tell the story of when my granddaughter was about 2.5 and her mother was away for a week. Her parents were away for a week. And I was changing her diaper at night and I was so tired and I was like, that's enough, that's enough. And my husband comes in, he's also a parenting educator, and he says, Ruth, you seem a little stern or a little harsh or something. I thought I was going to kill him. But then he went and he goes, I got your nose. And he was playing, with my granddaughter. And immediately those diapers were on in 2 seconds. And that playfulness was the solution to these difficulties. But when we get stressed, it's very hard to reach for. And I did not grow up with playfulness at all. I grew up in New York City. My parents were both Jewish. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma and struggle. And there just wasn't playfulness in the house. So I had to learn it. It doesn't mean playing Candyland, although that can be playful. It means being silly and playful just in the moment. And you can even do this with teenagers because they already think you're an idiot. So however you interact with them, trying to bring a little joy into it helps.
Well, and playfulness, I often talk about playfulness as the opposite of trauma, because trauma is repetitive behavior patterns that kept you safe at one time and no longer serve you. And playfulness is the scientific unfun way of saying it is response flexibility, which is the opposite of trauma, right? So it's the ability to be spontaneous and and choose a response that fits the situation in the moment, is the other side of that rigid trauma structures in the brain. And so playfulness signals safety to our children, but it also heals our own stuck, rigid trauma behaviors and patterns.
Response flexibility. Whoa.
That's the least fun way of saying play.
Well, what it means is in the moment you're not on automatic.
Right.
And
you're not repeating patterns or yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about trauma and thoughts, but before we do that, I just want to check in. Any other comments or observations? It's very helpful to Aaron and me to hear from you and to understand what you'd like to learn more about or what you'd like to discuss today. Just checking for comments. You can raise your hands. I want to say a couple of words about an orthopedic surgeon we've been working with who was curious to learn that when people took mindfulness or brain calming courses before back surgery, they had better outcomes. And he started to get very interested in the brain and body pain and body and anxiety. And he describes the fact that we are all built to notice danger. And so our brains are great at, if a tiger jumped into this room right now, I wouldn't even think about you all. I would immediately go into action to protect myself, fight with a tiger. I might faint. I might run, fight, flight, freeze. What is it? Freeze, flight.
Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Fight, yeah. So my brain would automatically do that. However, very, very often in our families, our brains are perceiving danger where there is none. And we're literally creating the whole fight, flight, freeze chemistry in our brain, cortisol, adrenaline, that goes throughout our whole body. So, you walk by your kid's room and they're supposed to be doing their homework and they're not doing their homework. Your brain could see that as, this kid's going to be living in my basement for the rest of his life. He's never going to graduate from high school. So, learning to manage those fearful thoughts and have brain calming practices and recognizing them is very important. And I'm just going to tell you one of those strategies. We have a whole class on this, but the strategy that is the most researched, I think, is called expressive writing. And you can sit down for 10 minutes a day with a timer, and you just pour out your thoughts and feelings on a piece of paper. You write on paper. It doesn't matter how you write. It doesn't matter if there's grammar or spelling or anything. You're just doing a brain dump. And all your thoughts and feelings, even things you would never, ever, ever want anyone to see or know. And when the timer goes off, you tear it up. We call it write and rip. This is a very practical, highly researched approach to brain calming. And what I've experienced with it when I'm doing it regularly, and Aaron, I just want to let you know, we're actually talking to one of the researchers of this after this class, if you want to come, James Pennybaker, because I want to talk to him about kids and families and this expressive writing. And my experience of it is when I do it regularly, when I start to have those fearful thoughts, I can jump back from them so easily. I can say, wait, that's not going to be helpful if I obsess on this right now. And I can just move away from it. And I think it's that ripping up every day of all that stuff you dump out and you rip it up and throw it away. It changes how your brain works. So you're more flexible, I think, from those fearful thoughts. And also trying to notice them really helps. There's so many things that you worry about with regard to your kids that aren't actually things to worry about. Any comments or questions? Everybody's been really quiet. Raise your hand. We'd love to see your hand go up. One recommendation I want to make to you all, which I think is it's one of the nicest start of school recommendations I've ever heard. It actually came from Professor Colleen Vesely. She's one of our teachers, and she's a professor of human development and family studies at George Mason University. And Colleen says it's nice to write a letter to the teacher about your child every year. And you write a letter saying what you really appreciate about your child. You write about their interests and strengths. You write about their struggles, their difficulties. You write about their role in the family and how they interact with family members. And you can write about your concerns, any concerns you have for the year. And you can give suggestions. You can say one of the things that helps my child calm down is this. And first of all, I think writing the letter is somewhat helpful in itself. But sharing it with the teacher at the very outset seems like a really positive start to the relationship with the teacher, which you're going to want to have and have in a positive way. Any thoughts about that, Aaron?
No, it's good advice. I usually I didn't do it with my older children, but I always do it with my younger one. Just because I think it takes a little bit more understanding. But I hadn't heard Colleen say that, but I love that.
Yeah, it's really a nice strategy. Dump and write. It's write and rip, but dump and write is good. That's a new one. Also writing a letter to my teacher. Yeah, I think and if you have a partner in parenting, I'd invite them to do this with you because first of all, it can help the two of you get on the same page by having that conversation. And also you can talk about your kids kind of in a neutral way with each other. And also each of us sees our kids so uniquely. One of the things that a trauma specialist, Gabor Mate, fabulous trauma specialist, anything he's written you want to read. His most recent book is called The Myth of Normal. It's very dense and demanding, but it's fabulous. He says that each child evokes unique thoughts, feelings, and behaviors from each parent. And I never really thought about it as the child evoking things from the parent. We kind of know it, but it's so true. I mean, the things that I took delight in and worried about with regard to my daughter were totally different than my husband. And I think that understanding that helps us get how subjective our relationships are with our kids. Do we have any other?
Yeah, there was a question about the letter for high school, whether it was appropriate for older kids.
That's a
And
good
I,
question.
I would say that there's an age at which their privacy concerns kind of like balance out the secret, the knowledge that you have of them in terms of, that information about who they are as a person. They start to own that a little bit more as they get older, and you need their permission to share it, I think. And
Yeah, yeah. My instinct would be that this is an elementary school exercise. However, maybe in middle school, for example, you ask the child if they want to write the letter, or if they want to, help you write the letter, or just ask them, what do you think you want your teacher to know about you, and make it more of a collaborative approach. High school, I think the way I would do this in high school is I would say to a high schooler, is there anything you want your teachers to know about you, as you start the year? Is there anything you want to let them know? And it might be particular teachers, it might be that a kid hates math, and they might want to let the teacher know that typically they really struggle with math, or they really love history, or they want to be, they want to be a this when they grow up, and they want skills around this. So it's sort of, it's moving towards kids advocating for themselves and
although in
feeling.
terms of like a practical exercise to just like alleviate your anxiety, that was one of the things you mentioned, is it might be helpful in and of itself as a writing exercise, as a write and rep. And I think that still holds true for a high school age child. Just don't forget the rip part. But write that letter if it's helpful.
Yeah, you can write down your worst worries about high school. My favorite psychiatrist says that adolescence is a disease you hope your kid recovers from. And I know that isn't an optimistic view, but it's 12 to 24. Adolescence starts with brain changes. At 12 years old, it doesn't start with puberty. It doesn't start with hormones. It starts with the reconstruction of the brain at 12 years old. And it goes all the way until 24. And it's no it's no coincidence, doesn't insurance, isn't insurance for kids more expensive until 25? Isn't that how it
Well, you
goes?
can't, yeah, and you can't rent a car until you're 25. And if you need to weed out the trustworthy science, trust the people who have money to lose. And it's not right. It's not the voting rights or military recruitment or any of those. It's the car
Insurance
company
companies.
recognize that you don't have a brain that's fully developed until 25.
Yeah. Yeah. Your child's brain is still under reconstruction from 12 to 24. And some of the characteristics of that reconstruction is that, at least in adolescence, and especially in the midst of adolescence, not all the way to 24, although it may be true all the way to 24, I don't know for sure. The brain tells the child, starting around 12 to some degree, and it gets more so as they get older, to relate to peers. They start to relate to peers for comfort. And as they get more into adolescence, it may appear to you that they think that social life is like, their life depends on it. But in fact, their success in the world does depend on having peers when they're ready to launch.
And
So
and
you
and
have a
in
child.
and in cave people times, which our brains don't know we're not living in, their survival would have depended on finding a tribe. For a teenager who we say, oh yeah, she's acting like it's life or death. Their brain's telling them it is life or death.
Yeah. And they do need those peers to launch successfully. They need one or two peers. Um, and and in our genes, it's telling us that we need a tribe. We need a tribe. So it's important to have deep compassion for kids around this. Their social concerns are very real, and they're biological. Their biology also cues them to turn towards their peers more, and this is a loss for many parents, but they will come back around as adults, so don't panic, um, as long as you maintain a positive relationship with them. And it also tells them that the brain is more pleasure seeking during adolescence than it is at any other developmental stage. The brain tells them, do what feels good and take risks, do things you've never done before, and do them in the presence of your peers. This is why raising adolescents is so difficult.
Yeah.
They're exploring and they're hanging out with their peers, and their brains are telling them to do things that are challenging. But as you're coping with all this, at least recognize that this is biological. This isn't your child willfully trying to drive you crazy.
There's also an aspect of the same kind of negative attention seeking that you see with like with younger children, where it's easy to recognize. So like it's where they look for the outer, like, I hate to use the analogy, but like the invisible fence, the dog has to sort of, like, you start with the flags and they have to find out where it is by listening for the beep and sometimes getting zapped. And kids will do the same thing. Like your 3-year-old who wanders away in the grocery store but looks over the shoulder to, like, make sure that you see that they're breaking that rule. They're looking for the outer limit of what you consider safe, when you tell them to come back, when your voice gets stern. And I think that there's a second sort of, there's another dimension of that to teenagers as well. As much as they're looking for approval from their peers, they still have sort of one eye over their shoulder looking for those boundaries to be indicated by us.
It's the next phase of seeking independence. It's so much focused on independence, but teenagers are just like little ones. The toddlers, it's called rapprochement. They go out in the world, they explore, then they come back for comfort. Teenagers have the same needs, but it's so much harder to give it to them because they're usually obnoxious while they're doing it. But they still very much need your comfort. And actually, teens that don't use alcohol, they report that their parents' opinion of them is one of the biggest drivers of not using alcohol. So you matter a lot, even though they seem to be so focused on their peers, but the way you see them, your facial expression, your tone of voice, all of that is still very, very important to them. And this is the period of time when they are creating their identity. They're saying, this is who I am. And they're trying on different identities. And part of the way they try on identities is by being not you. And it's a tough time. This is when your kid will come home and say, I don't believe in God. I'm not going to church anymore. And boy, it can feel like, very difficult. And your job is to be curious, to be interested. And this is, one of the best ways you can allay your own anxiety. When kids declare themselves, I'm different from you, which may be temporary. It isn't always permanent. It's often temporary. Your best strategy is to be curious. So help me understand that. Tell me more about that. What led you to decide that? That is going to keep your connection with your child, and it's going to help you understand your child and be more supportive and more influential. The more you can understand your child, the more you can influence them. It's a paradox. If you double down and say, you most certainly are going to church, and that's what our family does, and that's it, you've missed a big opportunity to learn about your kid. And you're more likely to win them over if you're willing to see the world from their point of view. And you're going to calm down. When you get curious, it'll calm your brain. Some of the things teenagers say can be outrageous, and that's part of what they're doing. They're testing the limits. But if you can be there for it, you're a lot safer. Any other questions or comments before we go? Was there anything else we wanted to share with folks about their own anxiety about school or starting school?
Well, I think that sort of like social media has become part of the landscape of starting school. And I'm talking about parents, going on the lists and who's got what teacher and which teachers are horrible and who did what and what the school's doing. And I would say, this is the same advice that I give my mother every time she calls for tech advice, which is that almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a little while, and that includes yourself. So I'd make sure that, like, going into the school year as you're into information gathering mode, also take some time to just enjoy those last few moments of summer. Sit, read a book, get outside, do things with your child that aren't online, and that'll do a lot to lower your anxiety level.
And also use that curiosity as you enter school, as school begins. Just be interested, just observe, just be curious, just inquire. Find useful questions. How was your day? What'd you learn today? Those aren't so great. You want to be asking smaller questions. Did you sit with anybody at lunch? Is there anything you particularly like about your teacher? What are you really hoping to learn in that class? What are you really curious about?
And I've tried to, I've tried to develop the practice of not starting with, my instinct is when they get off the bus is to ask that pro forma, how are you? Or to go deeper into those questions, but they don't want that either at that time. So what I do when they get off the bus is I just say, I'm so glad you're home. And then after a snack, after we get settled, then maybe some questions.
And meal times are nice
Yep.
times for checking in. Someone just mentioned school shootings. Can we say a few things about that, Aaron?
Yeah. I think that it's an opportunity for ourselves and for our kids to recognize that, that those threats tend to stand out big in our mind. But they're unlikely. It's good to be prepared. It's good to think ahead. It's unlikely to happen to you or your child. And there are very real threats that are real threats to their health and safety that are right in front of you and within your power to help. And, the pediatric mental health crisis is not, quite as sensational as this, school shooting endemic, but it's harmful. And while you have to sort of trust the authorities in your school to be doing the right thing to prepare and mitigate the risks of those sort of really horrible once in a while things, what we can do is focus on their health and well-being in terms of their anxiety level, our anxiety level, and making home feel like as safe a place as it can be.
And what you're focusing on at home. The other thing is it's a little bit like getting on a plane, if you're really anxious about getting on a plane, but in fact, it's actually safer than a car. It's looking at the data and really saying, okay, what percent of school children have been exposed to that violence? And if we could do the math, it's probably a teeny weeny little percentage. Not that it's nothing, it's very real, but just being realistic about that. And reassuring your kids if they ask about it. And also you can ask your school how they're talking to kids about this. And you can go to your school and ask for a conversation about what are your safety measures? What are you doing to protect the kids? Get yourself some information. And read about it. And sometimes taking action about things helps too. So, thinking about, okay, what action step can I take towards more safety in general? But it's the thing is, the media, when there is an event like this, we see it over and over and over for days and days and days, and it gets marked in our heads. If if we were showing, the gifted teacher that's turned around, a whole class of kids who are, really struggling, and if they showed those over and over and over, we would feel totally different about school. But it's not how media works. And there's so many, most kids thrive during most of the school year. That's mostly what's happening. They're getting to school, they're learning content, they're learning independence, they're learning to navigate in the world. And it's remarkable. We have public education for all kids. And you want to bring your brain back to the opportunity of school and finding what's right about it. Aaron often talks about how we signal to our kids safety and hope and joy and connection, or fear and isolation and judgment. We signal by our body language, our tone of voice, the words we say, our physical gestures. And our job right now is to signal enthusiasm and opportunity, and be realistic about the struggles our kids are having, and listen carefully and help them become advocates, help them become problem solvers, and figure out which problems they can handle and which problems you want to be focusing on. And I'll just tell you 3 little questions that we ask about whose problem is it to fix, and that is, or handle. Those 3 questions are: is my child too young to handle this problem? Is there going to be harm to a person or property? And am I being disrespected? So if your child comes home from school and says that they didn't get to sit with their best friend on the bus, they're probably not too young to handle that disappointment. There's not going to be any harm to anybody, and you're not being disrespected. However, if they come home and say, if your kindergartner comes home and say there was this 12-year-old boy that was bothering me, that child's too young to handle that. So that's your problem to solve. And when you figure out which problems kids own, you can coach problem solving without giving them solutions. And problem solving is one of the best gifts you can give your kids. Teenagers who perceive that they can solve problems tend to be safer and more competent during adolescence. If you're solving your kids' problems, if you're giving them solutions all the time, those unsolicited advice, that stuff, and they hit adolescence, they're going to be turning to their friends for all their solutions. And that is just a throw of the dice. So you want to start coaching problem solving early on. And that means figuring out which challenges belong to your child and learning the steps of problem solving. Anything else before we go? Today was the first day of kindergarten and just dropped off right before this meeting. It was really hard for me to even pick a school, to even pick a school after looking at 15 of them. My anxiety was super high after letting him go. And we want to hear what happens when you pick that child up. This is great. This was a, do you have any questions for us about what happens when you pick him up? And that's wonderful. Thanks, Aaron, for your recommendation on when and how to ask how the school day was. I have a tendency to jump right in. Yeah, I used to do that too. And I see them, I can't remember, I forgot. In my daughter's case, I had to be moving. If we went for a little walk, she would talk, but she did not talk if she was sitting down. It's just how she was. How do you ask how their day was? Do you have any suggestions, Aaron, to how to ask?
I don't think I think, it's, I've had not very good luck with asking the right questions, which has led me to think that it's, you just kind of got to let them do it. Like, let them know that you're interested in it, and then things will maybe come up organically. It, sometimes, like, the car ride is sort of this magical time where there's like just enough background noise, you're sort of side by side, they've got time to think. My kids will bring up things that I never would have thought I would get a response if I ask them. So I think letting them know that you're interested. I'd love to hear about your day when you're ready to tell me about it. Can you tell me a story from your day? Something like that can open up the time. There was a parent who I worked with a number of years ago who had his son had some behavior issues, but they had monkey time, they called it, at the end of the day. And it was him and his son. When his son would be in bed, he would sort of lay down next to him or sit next to him. And it was a time when his son could just sort of tell him anything about his day without dad trying to problem solve or, get on him about stuff or scold or any of that. And it didn't mean that he didn't revisit things later, but he just listened. And that was really before, I had met Ruth and learned all of this about the importance of just listening without judgment and not offering advice. And he just had an instinct for it. And that monkey time with this very difficult child, I think. And that came out of a ritual that they had created together. So, just finding those things in your routines.
I want to talk a little bit about rituals. Bedtime.
Oh yeah, this parent says, yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but you're totally right. When the option is to go to sleep or tell you about their day, you're gonna get the full story.
And you can do a timer. You can say, okay, let's spend 3 minutes on that, and then it's time. Actually, we just a sleep expert just joined our teaching team, so please don't hesitate to get in touch about sleep, because sleep is really important and really a challenge. I want to talk about a couple of rituals that are also ways of listening. In our family, at meal times, we used to we still do, hold hands and say one thing we appreciated about the day. And it was okay to pass. And we did it every single day. And we often would hear things at that process that we wouldn't have heard otherwise. They would tell something about school that they appreciated. Another nice ritual is at bedtime, you can ask your child, what's one way somebody was kind to you today? What's one way you were kind to somebody? Some families do roses and thorns. I think,
Peaches
you
and
know,
pits.
what?
Peaches and pits is the one I've heard.
Peaches and pits. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like, you know, what was a good part of your day and what was a challenging part of your day. I would start with the challenging part and then ask for the
Well,
positive part.
I like that, because with the emphasis that we place on routines, I think this isn't the only way of understanding them, but I sort of think about routines as being positioned sort of on a balance between rules and rituals, right? Like, um, routines can be about like rules that you're following or not following, but they can also, they're sort of the seed that rituals grow from. Like, you can't create a ritual in your family and have it be authentic. You can create routines and hope that they grow into rituals. And so by having that clear routine to your day, it allows these rituals that will be unique to you and your family and your child to emerge.
And I want to remind you about drawing again. I mean, drawing with kids, they'll show you stuff. You can draw about your day, they can draw about their day. And you know, something that happened today, something I like, something that was challenging, or just draw something, just draw, and their drawings will tell you things. I just want to see if there's any, I guess the one message we want to give you is that one of the most important tools for your child's mental health is for you to have a brain calming practice. That means something that you're really good at and that you can call upon when you're really under stress. Um, so for me, it's breath, having a particular breath. It might be visualizing something. It might be a gesture, just putting your hand over your heart, and whatever works, but it's something that you practice for 3 to 5 minutes a day. And then under stress, you can use easily. So we have some comments, Aaron, right?
Oh, just people were sharing some of the other rituals that they've developed around sharing high and low points of your day. So,
Can you say what they are? Because sometimes people are just listening and they're not watching the chat.
sure. So one of them was saying that what made you happy or smile. I like that. Sometimes I'll ask if was there something that was funny today. Um, we do. Somebody else said that they do a low cheer, a good, a not so good, and a shout out to someone you saw doing something kind or cheerworthy. And I really like that because when that orients children to noticing the kindness happening around them too. So that's
Well, I didn't know this, but we're predisposed to remember negative things better. We have a negative bias in our brains. We recall them better and we pay better attention to negative experiences. And when we were doing that appreciation at dinner, we were literally changing our kids' brains patterns, the pathways, because the brain got used to, oh, I'm supposed to find something positive every day. It became a habit. And my daughter's husband often says that she's like the big problem solver and can see the positive in everybody. and I realize it's kind of an acquired skill. And you can also keep one thing I wish I had done was keep the appreciations journal. So like at bedtime, you can say to your child, what's one thing you appreciated about today? And you write it down. Because that's sort of a memory book of certain friends and experiences, and it's a positive, sweet memory. And we have somebody starting kindergarten today. It's a great day to start today, and I hope that that little kindergartner comes home feeling very excited about school. Any last comments, observations? I want to remind everybody you can reach Erin or me or any of our 30 plus teachers at Peace at Home for one-on-one consultations, to ask questions. You can join our private Facebook group. It's over 1,500 professionals and parents, and often comments from Peace at Home teachers. And you can post questions and observations and cheer people on and gain resources from very wise people. And once a month, we have a free question and answer session. If you're a Peace at Home member, you can attend that. And even if you're even if you don't come from a company that has a Peace at Home program, you can get an individual membership. Just email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com. And if you work for a big corporation, bring Peace at Home to your wellness department or your benefits department or your HR department, or bring us to your school. Talk to your PTO. They might want to bring Peace at Home as a subscription to your school. So we'd love to hear from you. Again, I'm Ruth Freeman, founder of Peace at Home, and Erin Weintraub, Peace at Home teacher. And we will love to hear from you with any follow-up. I see there's one last comment. I'm going to catch it. Okay, good idea. Thanks so much, Erin. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Thanks, everybody.